Reagan embodies the essence of the themes of Mob Psycho 100. He is the standard that Mob looks up to. He's the most powerful character in the show and has the respect of some extremely powerful psychics that help grow his business, which he built from the ground up. He does all of this while being a complete fraud, lying to everyone around him and having no psychic powers. Despite this, he genuinely cares about those around him, which is what makes him the strongest and the essence of Mob Psycho 100's themes. That and the execution of the storytelling, which makes Reagan such a great character, is what I'm diving into in this video. In battle shonen, there's usually a powerful or successful character that the protagonist looks up to. This character, which is usually a mentor or parent, sets the standard for what the protagonist wants to be. Luffy and Shanks, or Gon and Jing, are some examples. Mob Psycho, although not a traditional shonen, has the same situation, but it's twisted in a really interesting way. Reagan is the standard for Mob's goals. He wants to be more like Reagan, and he looks up to him, despite often questioning and disagreeing with him, which we'll explore later in the video. In a lot of ways, Reagan is the exact opposite of Shigeo. Confident and worldly, he doesn't fall for lies, and he berates those who try to take advantage of others. Mob has a very simple view, especially in the beginning of the story, while Reagan better understands the nuances of any given situation. This is most apparent during two separate events in Season 1, and they both show how Mob grows as a person because of the influence of Reagan. First is the scene where Mob gets conned by salespeople trying to get him to pay an outrageous price for a worthless vase. While he doesn't completely understand the situation, Reagan fights back against the scammers, treating them how they were treating Mob and showing them their intimidation tactics won't work. Reagan knows all their tricks because he uses them. However, as he agrees with Mob at the end of this, people who prey on the weakness of others are the worst of the worst, which seems to make him a hypocrite, but we see throughout the story that Reagan doesn't have the heart to truly scam people, and he legitimately does his best to fix the problems his clients have, even if he lies to them in the process. Also, when he doesn't actually help in any meaningful way, he refuses the payment. These actions give him more credibility and shows Mob, even when he doesn't consciously notice, that his master is a genuinely good person. Through this situation and all the times Reagan is there for him, Mob is able to rely on him as an adult that really understands what he's going through, or so he thinks. The second scene where we see the most obvious influence Reagan has on Mob is in the finale of Season 1. Up to this point, Mob had wholeheartedly believed in his master and did his best to follow Reagan's advice, specifically that he should never use his powers against humans. But now, an evil Esper organization had kidnapped his brother. He had no choice but to attack to bring him home. Reagan didn't know what was going on when his student didn't show up for work that day, so he tracked Mob through his phone and went after him, because again, Reagan genuinely cares. Reagan's actual power is his charisma. He deals with the goons and gets them to abandon the shady organization, but when he encounters its leaders, Reagan realizes they are adults who never grew up. He can't reason with them at all. At this point, he runs and tells Mob to also, although the way of escape is blocked by the psychic, so he can't. Teruki and Ritsu fight the scars, but the enemy's powers are stronger than the boys, and Mob seems to be the only way out of the situation. However, Reagan still objects to the fighting, telling Mob don't bother fighting with them, and they aren't worth it. He ends with a line that stops Mob from overreacting to a point he would never recover from, when he slaps him and says, "It's okay to run away." The first time watching the scene, I just wanted Mob to beat all the annoying bad guys and put them in their place. But looking closer at it a second time, Reagan was completely right. There was nothing stopping them from running. Mob has the power to get out of that situation, saving all the people he cares about without bothering to fight the psycho adults who were trying to kill him. Shigeo, a middle schooler, didn't need to be in that situation. And as an adult and someone who cared about Mob, Reagan felt the responsibility to take care of these kids. This ends with Mob realizing they are in a situation where they will get hurt if they don't do anything, but he's not the one who has to do it, so he leaves it up to Reagan. By doing this, he transfers his powers to his master, which leads to a solid 10 minutes of Reagan berating these childish adults for trying to prove they were different from everyone else. All their heinous deeds in this organization stemmed from the idea that they were special and important because of their abilities. In this way, Reagan embodied one of the main themes of the anime. No one is really special special, and that means you can be whatever you want. It's like a parody and partially a critique of the shonen genre, which focuses so heavily on fighting for power, success, and your dreams, which is fine or even a great thing to do, but the whole message of Mob is that, in the end, how much you achieve or how special you become isn't really important if you aren't a good person, which Reagan proves he is, by yelling at these espers not out of superiority or just to prove himself right, but because they needed to be told the truth and fix the error of their way. This scene really shows how Mob trusts his master. He learns to give up and rely more on others. If Mob were to kill the psychics attacking them, they would have survived, and it would have dealt with the immediate threat, while also not necessarily being wrong because it was self-defense. However, because the adult, Reagan, dealt with the situation, the psychics were not only defeated, they were shown that they were wrong, that their insecurities, pride, and fear were controlling them. From this, they became better people who went on to live more normal, healthy lives. While Mob Psycho 100 teaches your life is your own, it doesn't mean you do everything by yourself and in your own strength. There are others to rely on and turn to. I'm not going to cover it in this video because this is about Reagan, but Mob Psycho doesn't just show us the pacifist approach, with Season 2's ending giving us a situation where Mob had to have the determination to face the enemies head on and actually fight, but he was only able to have that strength because he had learned to rely on Reagan and others. The balance of the different situations, how complex life is, really shows the truth and a realism beyond just a theme or message to its audience. Reagan was the best way out of that situation, and he is a great role model for Mob in his authentic kindness and caring attitude. However, he is not perfect, and he isn't just imperfect morally, he is also imperfect in the things he is best at. Season 1 showed us the heart of Reagan and the situations that brought out his best, but Season 2 showed us him at his worst. This is so vital for his character and the themes of the show. Reagan pressured Mob to exercise a spirit in the middle of the day with no notice, taking him away from friends, which Reagan assumed were fake and just using him. Reagan handled the situation in his usual confident and overbearing way, but Mob didn't buy it this time. His line, "I'm starting to realize not everything you say is true, Master," begins a very important arc for the development of Reagan and Mob's relationship. Although the way Reagan uses Mob is shown more as a joke throughout the series, it has to be addressed. And this is the first time it is really dealt with in the series, because it's the first time Reagan really fails at being a kind person. However, this story arc is a little more complex than Mob just realizing he's being used. If Season 1 is Mob learning to trust Reagan and letting him handle the problem, Season 2 is Mob learning that he can't always trust Reagan to handle all his problems. He needs to balance relying on his mentor with shirking responsibility. But Reagan's development is the really interesting part here. Initially, he lies to himself about the true reason he has Mob as his disciple. He is worried about his business when Mob doesn't show up for work, but he convinces himself that it's not a big deal because Mob really has no one to turn to except his master. And even if he doesn't come back, Reagan started this business without Mob, so he can also be successful without him. And he actually becomes very successful without him. Throwing himself headlong into his work, he becomes very popular from succeeding in certain jobs that gave him media attention. This culminates in his television appearance where he's set up by Jodo, another famous psychic who wants revenge against Reagan for drop-kicking him in a previous arc because of a certain evil spirit possession situation. Once again, Reagan fails in one of his biggest strengths. He falls for the setup and is made to look like a fool. At this point, he is at his lowest. He lost everything. As a con man, he failed. As a psychic, he failed. Without Mob, he was powerless. But in the end, the success and fame was not what he cared about. The fantastic ending of this arc shows why Reagan is the most powerful character in the show. He doesn't beg Mob to come back. He doesn't ask him to fix his problems. Reagan finally tells himself the truth. Yes, he has been using Mob and didn't treat him very well, but he wasn't just his master because it was a good business arrangement. Reagan wanted Mob as a friend. The press pushes him to answer their questions about the allegations that he's a fraud at the end of the arc. Ignoring the reporters, he turns to the camera and says to Mob, "You've grown up so much, you know that?" Acknowledging his faults and getting over his pride to realize how much he really cares about the boy, Reagan shows his true feelings for Mob. Once he turns back to caring about his friend instead of using him, he instantly regains his most powerful weapon. The ensuing earthquake and floating equipment ends his current problems of having his character attacked by the press. After this, he meets Mob on his way out, and he asks him if he knows what he really is. Mob answers in a beautiful way that cements the point of Reagan's character. Mob says he's always known the truth about Reagan, that he is a genuinely good guy. In the end, it doesn't matter to Mob whether Reagan is truly a psychic or not. Mob stays with him because he is a genuinely good person, and that's what Mob wants to be. He's not a perfect person, and Mob truly understands that after this event, but in the end, the authentic care that Reagan has for his student is what makes him a good person. He fails and lies and isn't even nice sometimes, but his heart is in the right place, and that's what matters. But this doesn't just show that Reagan is a good person for Mob to look up to. It isn't just a teacher and learner. Their relationship helps both of them change and grow as people, which is equally important for Mob to look up to. Even through his biggest mistakes, Reagan changes and chooses to care about Mob, and that is what's really worth looking up to. In the end, Shigeo is the main character of Mob Psycho, and Reagan is in the story for his development. Season 1 showed us Mob giving up to Reagan when he needed to, and Season 2 showed us Mob learning to trust himself more during their disagreement and in the battle against Tochiro. Season 3 is where the story wraps all the way back to the beginning, and to the true problem. The battle being waged by Mob's emotions. As I mentioned throughout this video, Reagan is the epitome of what Mob wants to be, because he is confident and can better deal with tough situations. But it's also because Reagan is more open emotionally. He expresses himself in an over-the-top exaggerated way, the complete opposite of Mob. Even through his development of figuring out problems and learning more about himself and others, Mob is still shoving down his emotions and won't truly open up to anybody, because he won't open up to himself. On the way to confess his feelings to Tsubomi-chan, which is a huge step for him to let out how he truly feels, he gets hit by a car and loses complete control of himself, acting entirely out of emotions instead of entirely out of logic and thought. He causes a major disaster, and no psychic can stand up to him. Teruki, his brother Ritsu, and even Tochiro come back to face him, but none of them can get through to him. However, despite having no powers, and therefore it was extremely dangerous for him to be anywhere near Mob, Reagan pushes through the tornado caused by the energy emanating from his student and faces Mob. Not fearing him or shunning him, Reagan accepts Mob at his worst, just as Mob did for him. Initially, he laments not being aware of how much Mob was holding onto, not so he could prevent this disaster, but because Mob had been suffering so much this whole time without even realizing it. He fights for Mob and tries to get through to him, showing the sheer will of his desires. Near the beginning, when Mob is pushing him back, Reagan reveals that he has been working out because he was inspired by Mob. Another small moment that shows so much. The reason for self-improvement is that you can help others along with yourself, and their relationship is a perfect example of that, as both of them are helping each other grow. However, even getting through all of that, he is still unable to get him out of his emotional state. But through the help of Dimple, Reagan does finally calm down Mob and gets him to listen to his master's words. And he does this by finally trusting Mob with the one thing he'd been holding on to this entire time. He finally told Mob the truth. He has no powers. He's just been using him this entire time. Reagan was never really a person to look up to because he was wise and had everything figured out. Just like his student, he was hiding a part of himself, despising that part of himself, but still holding on to it. Reagan was never better than Mob. He wasn't really better than anyone who he lectured or helped throughout the series, but that's what made him great. Being confident, not struggling with worry, and always having the right answers were never the things that were worth looking up to Reagan for. It was ultimately that he was a good person who helped Mob with what he could, while also working on his own problems when they got in the way of what was important. Despite the truth being told straight to his face, the next time we see Mob interact with Reagan, he once again calls him master. Reagan is the most powerful character in Mob Psycho. This is a thing One does in his storytelling with this, and more obviously in One Punch Man. He pokes fun at shonen powers and power scaling. Despite being an average human, Reagan literally never loses to a psychic in any fight he ends up in. I called him the most powerful character in my previous video that came out before the finale, and sure enough, he even defeats Mob, who is going all out. Multiple times throughout the series, characters begin to question whether Reagan has powers because of a sudden strength he shows, but it was never psychic abilities, it was his strength of character. Because of the influence of this lying, manipulative con man, Mob was able to accept himself and his emotions. When he laughs in the last episode, it dawned on me that Mob had never laughed throughout the whole series. He was so closed off, I, just like Reagan, didn't understand how far in his shell he was. This simple expression of laughter was a perfect ending for an incredible series. In conclusion, Reagan is the essence of Mob Psycho 100 because he emulates the themes of the story. Being perfect doesn't matter. Having all the answers doesn't matter. Even being righteous morally isn't as important as having a genuinely caring heart, because from that and the desire to be better, all the rest will fall into place. And he is the essence not only by themes, but also by his pure entertainment value. His wacky personality and hilarious comedic timing that never conflicts with the emotional and powerful moments shows that in every way, Reagan is the essence of Mob Psycho 100, and along with this, one of the greatest characters ever written. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe, as I'm getting so close to 1,000 subscribers and would really like to hit that milestone. Also, if you want more analytical videos like these, or just more Mob Psycho videos, check out what's on the end screen. See you in the comments. That's all for me. Hope you enjoyed. Jamyo.